So I started out this project the same way that I do every project, with a very detailed technical drawing that will serve as my blueprint. Unfortunately, this time I had to take things a little bit more seriously and actually draw up what I wanted on SketchUp to give myself a better idea of the cuts that I needed to make. Once I had a cut list, I got a bunch of Jatoba hardwood and got started. Jatoba is an exotic hardwood from South America, and it's sometimes called Brazilian cherry. I love the finished look of it, and it's a very heavy and sturdy wood, but it's not easy to work and it will inevitably lead to a ton of splinters. So for this bench, I wanted to go with a Prairie Style-inspired look because A, I think it looks really nice, and B, it has character. And that's especially so in contrast to mid-century modern, which is so overdone when it comes to wood furniture, and it's actually bad for humanity, in my opinion, but I'm right. So the Prairie School or Prairie Style arose around the start of the 20th century, and it's strongly associated with Frank Lloyd Wright. It's really prominent in the Midwest, and it's characterized by long horizontal lines that are meant to evoke the flat expanse of the Midwestern prairie. It started to go out of style by the 1920s, but it's had a huge impact on art and architecture, particularly in Chicago and its surrounding suburbs. On the other hand, mid-century modern and the larger modernism movement arose in the aftermath of World War II. And if you've ever been frustrated by the lack of ornamentation and the plain boringness of modernism, that's actually by design. You have to keep in mind that artistic movements don't exist in a vacuum. They're strongly influenced by philosophical trends, which is why modernism is both an artistic as well as a philosophical movement. As a school of thought, it aims to reject the past entirely and create a new, industrial, urban, and efficient world. Now, as a philosophical tradition, this is hugely problematic because it necessarily causes us to look at our past as being backwards and worthy of ridicule. By rejecting the past entirely, the modernist movement can then attempt to reshape society, government, religion, and art into something new, detached from our human past and aimed at a capitalist-like efficiency. The inherent problems here are obvious. No civilization can properly function if it hates its own history. By the way, here I'm using the Festool domino to put together the legs of the bench, and I seriously cannot get over how much easier this tool makes every single project. And no, I'm not sponsored by Festool, but I am not above such an arrangement. Call me. But anyways, back to aesthetics. Modernism then leads to a really boring uniformity that's focused on building things, both buildings as well as furniture, as cheaply and as easily as possible with little to no ornamentation. This is great economically because you can make things cheap, but really bad for diversity because everything ends up looking the same. This is why skyscrapers in cities all over the world end up looking more or less the same. They're big rectangles made out of metal and glass no matter where you go, because the focus is on efficiency, not necessarily on aesthetics. By the way, at this point in the project, I have two sets of legs glued up and ready to go, and here I am attaching the crossbar that is going to provide stability for the entire bench. And yes, I'm using dominoes again. The goal is to finish the entire bench without using a single screw. Yes, I very easily could have cut this part out, but I think watching me struggle with a clamp that has too much dried up glue is essential viewing to understand how to build things like this. Now I can start to put in the dominoes to attach the top to the legs. This step required way too much math since I had to center the legs on the top and then figure out where to cut out 8 different holes for the dominoes. Pocket screws would have been much easier, but if I used pocket screws, then I can't pretend to be a quote real woodworker who looks down on others, so I guess that's a no-go. So instead, I'm just being really careful about measuring from the corners to make sure it's all centered, and then marking off the spots on the top for each leg to attach. And because I spent so much time just standing around wondering what to do next, I filled up my phone storage and ended up not catching the part where I actually cut the holes for the dominoes. So you'll just have to trust that I actually did that. I can't tell you how nerve-wracking it is to have all these pieces that have to line up exactly for the whole thing to fit. Luckily, wood does bend a little bit, which helps make up for any imperfections. And I did manage to get it all squared away and ready for a glue up. Cue gratuitous and fully intentional logo placement as I take off all the clamps. And we have a bench. All that's left is sanding and finishing. I skipped the sanding because nobody actually wants to see that, and for the finish here I'm using Walrus Oil's furniture oil. Anyways, I've always really liked Prairie Style because it has a sense of simplicity derived from nature, and it's not a rejection of our collective civilizational pasts. And I unironically think that the Midwest is clearly the best part of America, and Prairie Style is probably the most Midwestern architectural movement to ever exist. And it looks nice. So now, after a couple days of work, a lot of glue, and about $100 worth of hardwood, I have a piece I'm really proud of that evokes an aesthetic style that I really love.